Welcome to Precog Time. Tonight we're here with Martina Cox. Martina is an artist and a designer who's from and also now living in New York City. And she began making clothing as an extension of her art practice while she was in undergrad. And it makes artwork which is made from upcycled or vintage garments and has a strong relationship to the history of domestic labor, gender politics, and surrealism. And so we're really happy to welcome Martina tonight. And I guess our first question is normally, how are you doing in quarantine? But it feels like maybe we were talking about that before a little bit. So I was actually gonna start out with maybe a somewhat tangential question before we dive into looking at and thinking about your work, but which is, how has your experience working at a testing center and especially like the aesthetics around COVID, like masks and like these like plastic face shields and PPE, like, is that something that you started to think about in relationship to garments and thinking about like clothing fabrication?
Not necessarily. I feel like I've definitely been keeping those two parts of my life relatively separate. I do feel like each inspire me, quote unquote, each day to like be going out there. And then when I come back here, I feel like, I have my like days that I'm not working there to really like express myself creatively. So, and I have been making masks, which I've been making like in slow motion. I think I've been working on the same 8 masks for like the past month. But I will probably show them later. I really am proud of them. And I think I'll probably be putting them up online soon to sell, to raise money for charity, as I think so many amazing designers have been doing. And it's been such a positive side of like making clothing and being in fashion during a pandemic. So that has been, I guess, in terms of masks, I've been making those. I've been using a lot of like gaudy florals and chains and charms, and so they're all very extra. um, but that's, yeah, I think something that does speak to like a lot of my practice. I do like spending like way too long on certain things. In terms like I feel like it's like a rejection of like the fashion industry at large, because it's always so daunting to me how designers will have like 2, 3, like upward of 4 shows a year. And like that's even aside from like a large company like H&M or like those big fast fashion brands. Just like in general, the idea of having like 2 shows a year to me sounds almost impossible. So I think I do work quite slowly on purpose.
Yeah. Well, also now things are changing or going to change a lot. Like because I think like Gucci's only going to do 2 shows a year, and that's like a big deal.
It is, yeah.
Yeah, to like break away from the system that, was kind of exhausting for everyone. And
for me, it's always been so daunting. Like when, like I think Azzedine Alaïa that was one thing that he was really adamant about, was only putting out a show when he felt ready. That he had like a collection, and I think that that spoke like so much to me. And I know that in like a more contemporary version, Gauntlet Chang made a post like last Fashion Week saying that they were also like having their mind and political views elsewhere at the moment, and we're not going to be showing at that Fashion Week. And that also, it just like resonates with me so much, because I do really find the fashion schedule so daunting, to the point where I do feel like I work intentionally very, very slowly.
Martina, so how did you become interested in making garments? Like, how you went to art school and sometime inside of your time in undergrad decided to focus your art practice on the creation of garments. So could you tell us a little bit about that history?
Well, yeah, I think since middle school, I've been like super obsessed with getting dressed. And I know I like started thrifting around then, and I really loved the creative freedom that allowed people. And I did intern for a designer in high school, and it was kind of when I entered art school, I started to like move away from that because I feel like the school that I was going to was like very, very intelligent, and I felt very confused there. And it was like a lot of the work that was being made was like very conceptual work, and I was just coming from a science high school and kind of felt incredibly lost there. So I started making work that I felt like I was supposed to be making in art school. It was a critique-based environment, so I was like trying to think of like pieces to make that could like spark like a good critique in school, and that's not really like how you should be making artwork, and that was totally reflected in the work I was like putting out. So it took like a couple of like horrendous critiques that I was like cried out of for me to like take a break from school, and I started an online vintage store. And it was just like that working with clothing every single day and not being in school that helped me realize like, oh, like I'm so much happier thrifting for a living than I am trying to figure out like paintings or like collages that I can make to talk about in class. So I think it's been a couple years, so I'm dramatizing everything a little bit, reflecting.
And then you moved to Berlin right after school?
Yes, I did move to Berlin. I was really into the club scene there because I really loved getting dressed up for it. And so I think it was that combination of like having an online vintage store and like getting dressed up to go out, where like I was taking clothes that I thrifted and I would start to like cut them apart and like tie them together. And I'd have like 3 outfits packed in my backpack because I wanted to show off like 3, not 1 for the weekend. So that kind of, it just like I was like unintentionally inching towards making clothing without really realizing it. And then after that year, like I arrived back to school and I was like hit with reality again that I had to like make work, and I felt very, like I said, like I developed like a tic of like turning bright red when talking about my work because I felt so uncomfortable talking about my work in school. And I just decided like to be crazy and make clothes in art school, because I'd always just thought going into art school that fashion was something separate and like very superficial in this environment that I was being like introduced to, like where everyone was super into theory and like making like very, very intelligent work. Like it felt like so beyond me. I mean,
Inaccessible? It
wasn't inaccessible. It was just very impressive, and I felt like I felt very daunted by it. So I realized how much happier I was working with clothing, and so I just promised myself that I would continue to do so as a practice, no matter like what anyone said. And surprise when you're like true to yourself, the work that you
first clothing piece you made.
The first clothing piece I made, I guess I was trying to make like pieces that I had envisioned really wanting to exist. I didn't realize that this piece existed already. It was in the Met. This one Japanese designer, I'm forgetting his name, but he was in the Catholic Church Met exhibition 2 years back. He made pieces with the Bosch Garden of Earthly Delights. But yeah, I really was obsessed with that painting all throughout school, and just like Northern Renaissance in general. And so I really just wanted a pair of pants with that painting printed on it. So that was kind of the first, so that was them in the process. I kind of deconstructed the 3 panels because I was really fascinated with how little was known about this painting. So if you don't know the original painting, I should have included a photo. I didn't.
I think people know. Really, yeah. Also, there's not a lot of information on him, on the painter.
No, there's like very, very little information on Hieronymus Bosch, which adds to the whole mystery, because he was painting in this like very, very like intensely religious society, and like everyone's like not sure if you're like if he's representing like the ultimate sin, or like there's just so many. I wrote a little bit about it on my website, but just the fact that there was like the idea that there's on the left panel there's God with Adam and Eve, and God is looking straight out almost at you. So some people interpret it that he's like judging you for like watching this like center panel. So I kind of deconstructed all 3 panels and like decided to make it like a ombre effect, both like as like a
and
how and like
was the experience of making your own pair of pants? Because I feel like I tried, my first pair of pants that I made was very difficult.
It was not like your average pair of pants because each square is hand printed.
Okay. So it took a long time.
It took like a month and a half to make that first pair, because I had to cut out every single square from like basic white cotton, and then I had to treat each square, and then I had to print each square individually, and then I sewed it together to make the fabric, and then I would cut the pattern out, and then I could start sewing the pants. So that was my first piece that I made, and while in the process I was making other pieces, because I was still in school and I was still having assignments and having to show during critique and everything. Those shoes actually were another pair of that was another piece that I made very early on my last year in art school. So I think this can maybe, well, one thing
What
to
is
say
is that corn? I was gonna ask, are those little corn peanuts?
yes, yeah.
Okay. So you make your own print?
I did. And those are hand painted actually.
Oh my god. So what was the assignment?
I mean, at Cooper there aren't really assignments. I think you just like show work.
You have to do something.
It's just a critique based. Okay. Yeah, it depends. I mean, there's technical classes, but like for sculpture, for painting, you can pretty much show whatever. And I guess like I'll go back to the Bosch pants in a second, but so one thing I was thinking about at the time as well was because I had these like floral gloves and I was finding myself drawn to like these floral prints because I thought like I really saw this weird sort of over situation happening with prints like these 50s florals, and just kind of really thinking about them for a second and how they're so present. Like I remember in middle school like discovering Urban Outfitters and like getting like floral vintage dresses and things like that, like, and being obsessed with them, but like how weighted the subject of like a floral can be, a floral print, in terms of like cult of domesticity, which is something that I definitely talk a lot about in my work. And I feel like I maybe had writing on this somewhere, but I guess I just
Martina, can you talk a little bit about the references to architecture and statuary in your work?
Yeah, I think, well, can I finish the thought about this?
Yeah, sure.
It is separate from that. I feel like that's definitely more with, like the tiny people. But no, this was me trying to like address like the darkness in like a floral or like a vintage print, in terms of like, be like, I feel like a housewife maybe from a different generation would look at like react to like a floral print in a different way than someone like a 12-year-old girl in New York City at like Urban Outfitters. And so I feel like kind of like turning these like vintage type prints into like these phallic objects kind of starts to address that, but like with a humor. And then yeah, segueing into the architecture, like I was just thinking about clothing at this time as like less about architecture and more about support systems and structures, and how clothing at the end of the day were like these various types of like support systems, and how like a strap can't exist without like a top, and like they're dependent on each other in order to exist, which is like a really bizarre way to think about clothing, but at that point that's where I was. And I started out, so I feel like where this came from was like I was really, really struck by the image, like when I was a kid, of Gulliver's Travels. I feel like I'm just realizing this now. And I had drawings of these figurines in all of my class notes, which I did pull up here. Yeah, hold on. So like I was drawing them everywhere. So it was just because I was making clothing at the time. So yeah, you can see like, these are my class doodles. And it's like these like little figurines, like just covering the paper. And I guess maybe because I was thinking so much about clothing and like how like making clothing in like a fine art institution, they just started entering the situation. And the first piece was that halter top that you used for the cover photo. Like I just like the idea of like like rock climbing up a back or something, and using like the top to do that, and then it like fell right into like my thoughts about clothing being like various support systems together to make a piece. So it's always been much less about architecture and like much more along those lines of yeah. And then it goes into like discussing the body, which is something that is also really, really present in my work, just sort of like what the responsibilities of like dressing a femme body entail. Yeah.
So how do you think about the window in relation to this question of support, support the function of clothing, and then maybe this kind of device, which is recognizable from architecture, but which you're perhaps deploying toward a different end?
Yeah, I think it had to do with just like that surrealist element where you're playing with size and proportion, you're addressing the body in different ways. And I think creating those windows was kind of my reaction to a lot of the surrealist work that I was seeing. I think a specific example would be like Magritte and the way he approached like the femme body, because it was for me a little bit scary or like a little bit intimidating. I do have a photo here. I couldn't find it online, so I just have a printout from a reading called Seeing the Surrealist Women, We Are a Problem by Martina Cox. But basically, she starts off the piece kind of trashing this Man Ray piece. It's untitled 1929, and it's like this woman's torso that's been wrapped in plastic. And so her writing kind of talks about how like, you know, like surrealist artists like that are, or women surrealist artists have heads and hands and they paint and they speak, and kind of how like it's insulting to see like this torso just that's like constricted because it feels like it's so much more than that. So I feel like there is a lot of work from that time that definitely treats the femme body in a violent way, especially because it's so much about the woman's torso.
Was it, like the Black Dahlia murder inspired by surrealist painting?
I'm not sure.
I think so. I think yeah.
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 So like, but the thing is, there are so many artists that have like kind of taken that like objectification and kind of like turned it on its head. I think an example of that would be Valley Export, which is someone that you were mentioning in the questions to talk about. But that's, I guess, maybe something that I was trying to do with those window pieces, was like confronting a viewer through like taking something that is used to like be objectifying and like actually sort of turning it against like said viewer to sort of recreate those feelings, you know, because it's very confrontational to like have like this window piece. And I actually had a funny instance where I like self-censored myself when I was presenting that like one of those window pieces in class at a critique. I was like so nervous that my body like heated up and fogged up the window completely. And then that's like a really cool instance of it, like the viewer and the wearer, like the change in like vulnerability and power and confrontation and voyeurism starts to really like, there's a gray line that starts to get drawn between everything. But yeah, that's just one of my favorite anecdotes of one of my window pieces.
Martina, how do you deal with, do other people censor your images online? When you post something, do you ever have issues with that?
It's actually quite fascinating because I feel like I did, before I like had like a little bit more followers on Instagram, like I had kind of like figured out like a cool loophole where I was able to post those uncensored images because of the like the algorithm couldn't detect that it was like a boob because it was like a window with curtains and like.
Oh, so it was reading it as a different object.
Yeah, because I think that the algorithm does look out for like those visual cues, and it was just completely taken out of context. And it's kind of funny because it is kind of like, I love how bizarre like the boob looks in that situation, because it looks like an object but like in a funny way. Or like in I don't know, it feels a little bit different, I think, maybe because of the humor that it comes with it.
I mean, it also, one of the things which is interesting about this idea is that in terms of the functionality of clothing, right, we use it to cover and protect ourselves, but there's also this like degree of seduction around what it means to reveal.
Mm-hmm.
And like clothing which like indicates what your body might look like, but it doesn't, and that's why it's kind of tantalizing. And in this sense, the idea that you would just show the boob as a way of like
Yeah.
foregrounding and thus like denying eroticism is really a kind of interesting gesture, or it is an interesting gesture. And I was wondering if maybe this is a good place to talk about your relationship to similar strategies art historically,
Yeah.
and also kind of and maybe your strategy and the underlying maybe ethos and even ethics of what you're trying to get at inside of these garments.
Yeah. So I guess this is maybe what I want to bring up. This is kind of a surprise. It just happens to do with like a book that I started reading a couple days ago. And it's called like The Sexual Politics of Meat. Um, and it's just weird. I didn't expect it to have anything to do with my work, but I feel like it touches on a couple things that I'm fascinated by, especially like in terms of thinking about it in clothing, because it feels like another facet like of like the home, you know, like there's like the kitchen, and then there's like getting dressed, and then there's like the living room, and I feel like it's like an extension of that somehow. And so in this book they talk about the similarities, or they talk about how meat is very gendered. And I could go off on like a huge tangent about it, but I'll focus and say that there is something very similar in the way that like animals and women, this was written in the 90s as well, just as a side note, there's something like interesting in the way that animals and women go through this like similar process of like objectification, fragmentation, and consumption. And I feel like, yeah, like with an animal, like when it's killed, it's turned from like a living being into like an object. And the same happens with yeah, so when like a woman is, I guess, well, as like a trigger warning, when like a woman is like sexually assaulted, you know, like that objectification happens. And I think that the like consumption that happens either like physically with like eating meat, or like with consuming visual images of women, like in the way that we do like in our Western society, kind of start to mimic each other. And I feel like it culminates in like this example of like an ad, a Purdue ad, an old Purdue ad, where it said like on like one of their like chicken ads for chicken, like, are you a breast man or a leg man? And it's like so bizarre to like be putting like women's bodies and like food in such close context with each other. And I think that this is very like it just feels like related to my work for some reason. And I think that would be like a good segue into talking about, I think, Manet's Olympia. The painting. It's a painting that I thought about a lot when I was working. If you want to pull up the photo of the painting. So this painting has like caused such a huge uproar. And I feel like after reading this, I was just like immediately brought back to like thinking about this in art school. Because like personally, I feel like that viewer like staring into, you know, she's this, like she's a prostitute and she's like defying her objectivity, and I think the Black woman as well, because they're both so present. And it's like both women are like being removed from this objectivity. And I feel like this may have caused like, or I feel like this is what part of the reason that people were so offended by it. And even though she is nude, like she's kind of like confronting desire and like physically blocking it. So I feel like, I don't know how I thought of that when I was reading that chapter in the book, but it seemed to like spark that image in my head of that rejection of the being an object. And then another example is Valley Export, who's above. This is a snapshot from her Tap and Touch Cinema. It's one of my favorite pieces. She is, hold on, I'm just gonna pull, because I do have, so she's, the artist attached a box or theater to her bare chest covered with foam curtains, standing outside a public square / plaza in Berlin in the 60s. And the viewers were invited to put their hands inside the curtain and touch for 30 seconds at a time. And so like, I don't know. So, yeah, something I wrote was like, when watching the video, there's this sort of humor in it, but it seems to be rooted in the uncomfortable feeling of watching these men eagerly stick their hands in the theater, like her body was an object to be consumed. And these are words that I wrote like long before reading that. And then another quote from Valley Export is that the tactile reception is the opposite of the deceit of voyeurism. For as long as the citizen is satisfied with the reproduced copy of sexual freedom, the state is spared the sexual revolution. Tap and Touch Cinema is an example of how reinterpretation can activate the public. And so I've been a really big fan of her work. I think it really speaks to a lot of what I've tried to do with clothing, and she does it in like a more performative, confrontational manner. And yeah, the image above is called, it's a photograph from one of her pieces called Genital Panic, or Action Pants, Genital Panic, but in German. So basically she cut out the crotch in these pants and she walked around an art house theater in Munich, like while people were like sitting kind of like at crotch level. And so that's like a photograph from it. And I think that in this case, like she has like this gun, and a gun is like really associating with like, you know, male dominance or like, you know, power. And it's kind of positing like action over biology. And I don't know, defending like her female body at the same time with like the phallic symbol of the gun. And these are all really large words that I'm not used to just throwing out there, but yeah.
Martina, can I ask a question? Do you, because you know you make clothes and you sell it online or you sell it through Cafe Forgot, do you always know who your customer is? And have you ever seen someone wearing a piece of your clothing that you didn't know, and what it was doing once it was out in the world activating, you know?
Yeah. I mean, it's so funny, yeah, because I just talked about my clothes in such like intense manners, and like, you know,
you know, the kind of person
around
that would wear something like this.
Yeah, totally. I think like, so this is sadly like a piece that I was gonna work on before all of this craziness happened, where I did want to know. I don't know where like so many of my pieces went. For example, before I moved to Germany, like I had my senior thesis exhibition and I just like handed it to Cafe Forgot, and they sold so many of them. So I'm just like, where's my senior show? And I'm definitely curious, and I would like, this is something that I did want to do in the coming months. My priorities have shifted, so it'll be like probably in the later future, but I do want to know where my clothes are and how people wear them, and if they're kept as like something to be like saved inside, or like if they've been worn out. I've never seen my clothing out. I had a friend say that saw one of my window sweaters on the L train, and but that's about it. I would like to have to compile people's reactions from their experiences of like wearing my clothes, either in a public space or in a private space.
Cool.
Do you make custom pieces for people too? Like they approach you and sort of ask?
Yeah, that's my favorite. Yeah, that's like my favorite way to work with someone in terms of like selling a piece, is when they, you know, show me images of stuff that they liked from my work and then give me their measurements and then trust me with the rest. It's only happened a handful of times, but it's been really fun.
And I want to ask about copyright in fashion and your designs. You make such unique work, and it's very tailored, and it's, you know, one of a kind. And have you ever felt that, oh, someone's like making the same thing I'm making, or not yet? Or how do you control that? Is there any way?
Well, I feel like I have a really good control over it in the sense that no designer wants to go through the production process of what I do. Since my clothes are so
Difficult.
Yeah, like making miniature curtains takes a long time. And I almost feel like I've kind of like created this little safe space for myself where people are not gonna go through like making something like this little figurine here takes hours. And sometimes I'll have pieces that are covered in them. So some people really just don't like it takes a lot of patience.
Yeah. And then also, since you are self-taught, right? Seamstress. So how do you go about solving problems like when you're working? Do you just like YouTube?
Yeah.
Definitely YouTube. I feel like I started sewing like in 8th grade, and then I took a 8 or 9 year hiatus. So I feel like my grandmother taught me a lot when I was younger. She had like one of those really beautiful old Singer sewing machines. And my grandmother is someone that I've also made like a lot of my work inspired by. She was this like Italian lady, like beautiful Italian woman who had like this crazy work ethic. So I feel like she really inspired me in so many different levels, and including sewing. But being self-taught is very difficult. Like it feels like limiting, and of course there are positives in terms of like creativity when you're limited. But sometimes it does feel like to a certain extent. So I'm not sure if like school is something that I see in the future for myself, but yeah.
I'm thinking about how you're talking about performativity. And I know there are a bunch of people here now who who sew in one way or another. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about your relationship to sculpture and activation, right? Like how do you think about your work? Do you think about your work as a sculpture? Like, do you think about your work as a sculpture when someone's wearing it? Like, what are the boundaries between when a garment is a garment and when it's being activated? And as an add-on to this, I think maybe, and this is sort of an add-on question from Drea, can you talk about staging and photography as part of your work in terms of the aesthetics of presentation and how that does or doesn't relate to the affect of wearing and viewing? That was a lot of questions. So
Gabby, too many.
I think in general, trying to tie in some of those things. So yeah, I feel like definitely like a way that I've started to create like miniature monologues for certain situations. So sculptural garments is definitely a word I feel like I hear myself saying a lot. So I feel like there must be something there that's like causing me to like gravitate towards the use of the word sculptural. And I guess it's because sometimes like the clothing is limiting in terms of like movement, or it's very fragile, or there's something very performative about it. And performance is something that I really want to go into with my clothing, because I think that it does get stuck behind screens so often. It's like my clothes really lend itself to being photographed, especially like I mean, I'm very grateful for like so much of the exposure that I've gotten through Instagram, but it feels like sometimes it can be limiting in terms of how your clothing is like consumed, or like the kind of, that's where it sort of stays. Like I had like the window pants go very viral last year, and it felt kind of weird to like see something that I saw as like having so much like movement and like work behind it kind of be this like really easily consumed image. Like I really liked it. At the same time, there was like a Reddit thread about the pants, which I thought was really fun to like read comments that people said. I think, did I send you a screenshot of some of the Reddit thread comments?
No.
Oh, okay. So that was definitely super interesting. I feel like I got sidetracked from your original question, but I think I do like seeing my clothing start to dip its toes in like very different areas of like fine art and fashion. So I'm not trying to stick to anything, really.
Well, I guess my question has to do with when and how you feel the work is activated, and then how wearing or wearability participates that on the one hand, and then on the other hand, like your particular aesthetics of presentation, and whether and how that plays a role in these questions of confrontation, the confrontation of the viewer, the relationship to art history, you know, and the fact that these are in fact also garments.
Yeah, I think there is no ideal for me. Like I like seeing, like I like that there's so many different directions that, you know, people will take it. And so naturally one of them is going to be like photographing and like being like posted online. But this is something that I guess I just feel like I'll see more and more as time goes on, and like my clothing is dispersed more. I don't know. I already feel like my clothing has been very dispersed, so like I'm just like waiting to see like, you know, people's reactions or the spaces that people have had them activated in. I was going to be having a show / performance in June that I was planning for, and it was definitely going to be rooted in like more of a performance piece, but inside of like a gallery. So like what that entails in terms of like the freedom of, or like what wearing clothing like that in an art institution versus like a public place where like Valley Export does, like how that changes everything. And I think that is definitely like an area that I want to focus more about, like more on in my work in the future.
Currently working on pieces for that, and like even though like we can't do anything, would you do it online?
No, it has so much to do
It has to be in the space.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'm very excited to do it one day in the future. Like I said, I work really slowly, so I really don't feel rushed with that. I have like a whole list of pieces that I've been wanting to make for like months, but I've just been working on these masks, these 8 masks.
It's cool.
Do we get to see the mask?
Yeah, I can show around a little bit since I have, but yeah, I can give you a sneak peek to the mask.
Okay, cool.
If anyone else has some questions, send them over now and we can ask them as we're getting our studio tour.
Yes. Okay, so these masks are going to be up for sale soon. 100% of the proceeds will be donated. I still haven't decided on where because there are so many places that need the money right now, but they're very in line with my aesthetic. I'm trying to choose my favorite. Oh, this one's my favorite. So we have like little chains and yeah. I mean, I guess it's kind of fun to make them, but yeah, it's I've been working on the same 8 for like a month and a half. So.
Well, also, I mean, we're gonna be wearing masks for a long time, right? So you might as well wear something nice that you like, right? But I was gonna ask you about dressing during quarantine because it feels so like weird to, you know, you wake up and usually you're going to work, but I feel like I'm inside a lot and I feel like sometimes I have to make myself change my outfit and be like, no, what am I doing? Like, why am I don't dress like this. Like, why am I wearing this right now? And it's because I'm by myself or, you know, my partner. So I don't know. Have you felt a change?
Well, I leave my house more than I used to because of work.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because I kind of like always stayed in my studio, but getting dressed is so important to me, and like I work from home and I don't know, I get changed like 2 to 3 times a day average.
Oh, okay. That's good.
And I had like an assistant that would come in sometimes and she'd be like, do you get dressed up just because like I'm coming? And I'm like, nope, I dress up like this by myself all the time. If anything, like I feel like I don't leave my house because I'll put on like pretty extra outfits, and I think I collect lingerie, so I feel like quarantine like lends itself to like lounging around in in like slip dresses and peignoirs. I just purchased this this is a dress from the 20s that's completely falling apart. I bought it on Etsy and I liked the description of it because it was called Tragic Wounded Bird Dress. And I know it's like really bad, but I love finding really vintage fabrics from like the 30s and 40s and 50s that are like completely falling apart, and like wearing them and then letting them kind of like, every time I make a movement, like with this shirt, for example,
It like will break.
I like that, like I have to like move so carefully because like the fabric is like falling apart around me. I know that it's really like, as someone, I feel like someone who's like a fashion historian would like be like cringing right now, because they're pieces that should be like preserved. But I really love the performativity of like being like limited in movement. And actually this is like something that I wore because of the meat book, talking about like the sexual politics of meat, because I don't know, it felt like I had an extra limb, just for, you know, good measure.
Oh wait, I don't want to cut you off.
Oh, no, yeah, so that was just why I had, yeah.
So Nancy has a question about the relationship between the earlier work, so the Bosch pants, and how you're treating how you were thinking about Bosch, and whether you were thinking about him thematically or in relationship to like the kind of spirit of how these bodies are intermingling or relating to one another, and how you determined what those pants would look like, and whether Bosch informed your thinking on that front, and whether and how that connects to your later work and its relation to the body.
Well, I feel like, you know, it did tie into my other work pretty naturally, just because like Bosch was definitely coined like the term like the grandfather of surrealism. A lot of the surrealist artists from the 30s like really like turned to him for a lot of, you know, like he's mentioned so much by artists from that time. And I mean, there's just so many bodies in his work, and there's so many like fantastical creatures, and there's so much like there's so much sex, and like it's all just feels so unknown and surreal. So I feel like it definitely just kind of, even though it was like the first piece I started working on, it just made so much sense with what else I was like reading and, you know, getting inspired by at the time.
And then I think there's a shorter follow-up question, which is, are you influenced by Rebecca Horn? Rebecca Horn's work?
Yeah, I think, I'm trying to think like I think my biggest influences actually though, like I have been more like my favorite painter is Dorothea Tanning.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I'm just blanking on names now because I'm nervous. Dorothea Tanning and Whitney Chadwick, and I'll write them below later.
Oh, great. We have a question from Randy,
Mm-hmm.
who wants to know about your interest in puppeteering or puppets in relation to the clingy folks.
Yeah, that's such a good segue. It's like that's something I've been thinking about so much. I don't know if anyone's seen the movie The Double Life of Veronique.
Mm-hmm.
It's a Czech movie, and I just am, I mean, I've been thinking about wanting to have a puppet show for like a long time, and I saw this more recently, and there's this beautiful marionette scene in it that's just like very eerie and unsettling, but very gorgeous, and I always think about it. But I feel like before I saw that movie, like this is a piece that I made that I can share. But it was kind of like my first sort of moments of like playing with like puppetry with clothing. So this is like a ring. It's like a hand. And then like it's a skirt that has this sort of like appendage to it so that you can kind of like, it's like meant for waving. And this is my first attempts in like the world of puppetry. But I kind of liked that image of the two hands together, shadowing each other. And there's still like a window in here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that's one of my puppet inspired pieces. But yes, I definitely want to go in that direction way more in the future, which is something I've been saying for like a year, but I know I'll eventually do it.
And then there's another piece which I'm gonna pull up that has like wings, like puppeteered, like puppet wings, right? It's like a shirt that I'm gonna.
Oh, that you like lift up, like the one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
Here, I found it. Okay, I'll show y'all. And then Randy's other question, which I'll post to you as I'm pulling this up, was how you operate in terms of selling your clothing and pricing it, and whether it's difficult with you to part ways with your work and kind of let it out into the world.
Mm-hmm. I think, yeah, it's definitely not the most, like, it's not my favorite thing to do, but like, I think I've only just recently like decided that I would own like one of my pieces, because I always have them reserved. Like I don't touch them because I like tend to ruin all the clothes that I wear. But I yeah, that's one of my flasher tops. I like made a series of tops that like you could use for flashing people, and that was one of them. The other ones are like the curtains that you can pull up and down. But yeah, like the little people you wear on your thumbs to like, you know, lift up the corners of the shirt. But yeah, I would definitely like that's why I just want to have like this project where I see where people are wearing my clothes and like what their different experiences are, because I just think that they lend themselves to so many different types of performative experiences, and like I think that there's just like a lot of opportunity there to explore like how people like have relationships to their bodies and their clothes, and then their bodies and clothes and public spaces. So I definitely want to like see where that takes me in the future.
Cool. Sorry, I was just looking at the images, but so I feel like the idea about puppeteering is really interesting as well, because it allows for the wearer of the garment to participate in this performance in a particular way, so that it's not just about a viewer and the viewed thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
But there's also the question of the theater of clothing in general, or the theater and like expressiveness of clothing, and how much control someone has over those relationships, which seems like a good way of thinking about the quality of intervention in your work, like how the wearer can intervene into these systems that you're thinking about.
Mm-hmm.
And I was wondering if you could tell us what you're thinking, like what the most exciting things you're thinking about for the future are. Like, is there an idea for a garment that you really want to make that's like percolating in your brain?
Yes, I just I have like a whole sketchbook of different ideas. Like I said, I think sometimes not like being a self-taught sewer can be limiting in certain things that I do. But I really want to work on like playing with like the left and right of hands, and making gloves that have different messages on the palms. But that's like really and like something that I just recently started looking into. So there's a lot more I wanted to flesh out with that. In terms of like things that are more in completion, like going back to being about the home and body, I've been working on a lot of lingerie and creating like playing with the idea of how plastics were introduced into lingerie in the 40s and 50s, and just that idea of how bizarre it is to like be like the idea of like draping your body in like plastic to sleep or something, which is like technically that's what that is, even though it doesn't feel like that, and how like so much of what we wear is plastic, like a plastic. But I just like think that it's such a funny idea to think, like when you think about it, especially because there's so much of the lingerie from like the 60s, it's like so bubbly and like plasticky and bright and pink. And this is, I can show you one of the pieces that I finished that took me a very long time to make, but I did it while I was in quarantine. It is, oh, and I can show the other. So this dress, I showed it in my last studio visit, but this is a slip dress, and it's kind of comprised with all of these little people here.
What are the people? Are those ceramic?
No, it's Magic Sculpt, which is a polymer-based air drying clay. And I think that having those contrasts of materials of like the silkiness and then like the hardness of the figurines, it's like it's very uncomfortable or unsettling, and I feel like it maybe starts to reference some of the feelings I have towards like the idea of like sleeping in plastic, which sounds very morbid every time I say that out loud. But
So it sounds like it's like treating yourself. It's like lingerie is treating yourself the way someone might like treat a couch that they wanted to preserve or something. You know, like you put plastic on the couch.
Skirt that's
So like
inspired.
you put plastic on your body to sleep or something.
I have a skirt that is an ode to exactly that. It's hold on, I have to turn on the lights in here.
This couch.
Yeah, so I have a skirt that's like an ode to that. It's having this like floral ruffle on the bottom and then the plastic, and it was directly inspired by that the absurd idea that people cover their couches in plastic, because that's very strange. And then this is the sweater top that I made with the PVC tablecloth that has like the lace material on it.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, so that's your piece as well.
How would someone wash your clothing, like that piece?
Thinking the same
With
thing.
like little Windex, like.
So actually, I'm very proud of my clothing tags, and I can just quickly pull up one of them here. So yeah, I mean, it's PVC, so you can't put it in the dryer, but you can put it in the wash. They're very, like, I always have, so I collect Victorian ephemera. So like, this is one of my clothing tags. So it has like this, and then on the back it has all of the
Like washing instructions.
Yeah, and then I don't laminate them. I should, because I don't know, I like how gross the tape looks, but I just use tape to laminate them. And I kind of like how they reference some of the like plastics in my clothes. And then sometimes I write a poem on the back too. Every item is very like heartfelt.
Myra wants to know if you're interested in the rubber girdles that were worn in the 50s and 60s.
I have so many on my Etsy favorites right now. I think, there's also so bizarre, but so fascinating. And also just the history of corsetry and like the different versions of it throughout time are, so it's just like funny how human it is or something. Like corsetry is just like human nature. And I have one, it's not really a girdle, it's more like a garter belt. But it looks quite nice layering it over clothes. I've layered this one over a skirt. It won't look as nice over this because it's not like a pastel, but so this is like a garter skirt that has like the figurines on it, but it has like something just for the wearer, which is this hidden lady in here. And I kind of also, that's also something that I'm working on in the future, is I like the idea of having things for yourself in your clothes. So like, whether it's something in the lining or something that's hidden behind like a layer, that it's just sort of like for the wearer, just like for you to know that it's there. I guess that does reference lingerie, like, but in a more fun way. And this is, these are like this is like, I have a collection of cut out images from like porn of like people licking genitals, because I think they look kind of funny out of context. So that's where that's from. And it also references, I was very fascinated for a while and made some collages inspired by that idea of like people hiding porn between books, like before, you know, like when it was on paper, like that concept, like just hiding it between like in the pages of books. And it kind of just sort of was another little ode to that. Yeah. Because that happened to me once. I remember in high school, I found a book on the street. And it looked like an interesting book. And when I opened it, it was just like porn that fell out of it. Yeah, those are the girdles are definitely, it's such a good, it says my internet connection is unstable. Can you hear me?
Yeah. I can hear you.
Yeah, so that's like the lingerie that I'm exploring.
When you look for things online, do they usually come from all over the world, or like a certain place? Like, where do you look?
Well, like I said, I'm not used to shopping online so much. Most of the time I'm thrifting. I've found a lot of stuff through Etsy. Of course, all the best girdles on Etsy are in Paris or in France. So that's kind of been limiting because I'm not trying to like, I don't know, I feel like shipping international right now is just, yeah, just like for the person who's shipping it and just not to stress out the post systems or something. I don't know. For some reason, I've avoided international shipping. But I don't know. It's been kind of fun having the limitation of like, I like Poshmark and Mercari because sometimes it's people that are really just emptying out wardrobes and they're not trying to like curate anything. And sometimes you can find like really good gems that way. But yeah, I think I really just don't. I mean, I think recently I've started to try and support more younger designers that are also sold at Cafe Forgot, but I really don't buy very many new items. I think most of what I'm buying is like always secondhand. Yeah.
Well, I think that's a good place for us to end the formal part of this talk. Thank you so much, Martina, for joining us. And for anyone who still has questions or wants to chat and sort of share internet space, I am going to allow all of you to unmute yourselves now. So thanks for joining us. And thank you again, Martina, for coming on.
Next week, we're meeting on Wednesday, same time, and we're going to be talking to Alex, right?
Yeah, Alex Traniak, who's here. It's going to be an amazing talk about her very multifaceted work, and I won't give it all away now. But Alex,
say like something.
Oh, well, I mean, as far as I can tell, and Alex is here, so she can talk about what she wants, but the relationship, her work often deals with the relationship between healing and both personal healing and ecological healing, and how different kinds of representations and manifestations can both allow us to meditate on that concept and create networks of healing and support. Is that more or less right, Alex? So we're really looking forward to that next Wednesday. And all of you can unmute yourselves.
I have a question.
Hi, Joe.
Hi, Martina. I have a question. First of all, big fan. I love listening to you talk about your work. Can you talk a little bit about how you bridge the gap between art and fashion? Because it's so much, it like really defies the line between like what you can wear and what you should wear and what people feel comfortable wearing. And you kind of like opened up the discussion to people feeling more comfortable like exposing their bodies through art. Can you talk a little about that?
Yeah, I think that there's been so much of that happening where people are really realizing that there is this bridge. Like, for example, Cooper Union now has an exchange program, or had indefinitely, you know, because of everything, but they had finally opened up an exchange program with Central St. Martin's. And I'm kind of like kicking myself that they didn't have that while I was there, but it's okay. I just feel like that really goes to show that this is like something that's much, like it's really starting to permeate throughout the different worlds. Like I feel like as well during Fashion Week, I feel like so many fashion shows have started to like lend themselves way more towards performance art. And like, I think that people are starting to realize that there isn't like, I for me, at least while I was in art school, I felt like fashion was like superficial, and like I was in this like very serious, intense art school, and like that was like not something to be talked about or shown in that environment because it was like too like superficial or on this, you know, on commercial, and I feel silly for thinking that, but I just feel like I was in that mindset of like making conceptual work or something. So I think it's really nice to see those kinds of bridges starting to be divided. Yeah.
Were you the only one sort of making fashion stuff in your program, or
It
were there others?
was the first, like, my senior thesis show was all clothes, and that was definitely the first time I'd seen like a clothing-based thesis show. There is this girl, Arpana, who she graduated when I was a freshman. I'm forgetting her last name, but she did a lot of Nepalese based or inspired jewelry and chokers, and she went on to do some of the jewelry for like the Victoria's Secret fashion show. But her senior show is all like kind of paintings, even though she was making her jewelry on the side. So I feel like that maybe was like an example of like keeping those two worlds separate, because it was like 4 years before I graduated. And now there's a lot more of the intermingling at Cooper. And I feel like also a good example of like a modeling agency that is that was hosting Cafe Forgot on East 6th Street is No Agency. Like a big part of their message is to like have these models that like are all artists and musicians and like have like all of these talented younger like people as like that are just more than just models. So I think that's another great example of that.
And how did people react to to that show? Were they interested? Did they hate it? Or
No, it was really, really well received.
okay,
I thought it was
that's
funny. Yeah, I was like surprised that I mean, obviously I shouldn't have been surprised, but as soon as I started making work that felt like way more me, I kind of started having a much easier time at art school. I still was really shy in critiques, but I definitely started to like warm up to them a lot more. And by the end, and having a senior show, like it like felt good to be very proud of the work I was showing instead of like putting it up for a critique and being like, I hope I don't get torn apart right now. Yeah. So a much better dynamic was formed once I started doing that.
And then, so a lot of your favorite designers are on Cafe Forgot right now. And so I also feel like, is there anyone you're really excited about design, like that people should look up or?
I think, I feel like I need to like look more to the future because I do share like that space with so many young designers. But I'm so like stuck in the past. I like love like fashion history. So I can get pretty nerdy about that. But I think in terms of Cafe Forgot, like someone I worked with was Hanan Sharifa. Like I really love her work. She is Moroccan and from Minnesota and makes a lot of like work inspired by her heritage. And trying to think of other Cafe Forgot designers. A lot of beautiful knitwear designers at Cafe Forgot. But I don't want to butcher their names. And
okay. I guess people can also just go to the website and they're like always posting new work, right?
Yeah, and trying to think. I feel so bad. I always blank out on names and I'm trying to remember them on the spot. But this will, like I said, I'll add to this more in terms of like.
Yeah, we can post those later.
Yeah, there's a lot of inspo that I can definitely add to. I just have like sort of archives on my computer.
Are there any movies that you're watching right now that you recommend for fun?
Yeah, I have like a whole movie list of like fashion inspired movies that I really, really love, like in terms of the styling or the aesthetics. I think, I mean, since I started working 7 days a week, I stopped watching movies at an alarming rate. But before that, I was watching like 2 to 3 a day. I'm just gonna pull up my list. So in terms of like my favorite like styling in movies, In the Mood for Love by Wong Kar-wai is one of my favorites just because of the wallpapers and the colors and the traditional dresses. They're so stunning. Who Are You? Polly McGoo is like a really awesome, weird, new wave French movie, and like the opening scene is like mocking a fashion show where like all the models are wearing these like elaborate like metal sculptures, and it's really fantastic. And another movie is House of Tolerance. It's a French film that's set the turn of the century. It's like actually they go over 2 years, 1899 and 1900, and like the new year, and it's set in like a really high-end brothel in France. And the clothing is just so stunning, and it's kind of following these like group of girls that are kind of like sisters, but they have like this, like the problems that arise when you're like a prostitute and like living in a brothel, and it's just very well done, especially in terms of the costuming. And then I guess I really love that my favorite director is Peter Greenaway. I can go on about movies really for a long time, but my favorite director is Peter Greenaway. He, for some reason, has amazing connects to fashion designers. So he's had Gaultier Style do the costuming for The Cook, the Thief, His Wife, and Her Lover. Margiela did the styling for his movie The Pillow Book. And yeah, his work is just very well done as well.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know.
They're really beautiful movies, so it makes sense that, you know.
Yeah. I mean, I was just watching The Pillow Book because I like him as a director, and then just Martin Margiela, just like his name just pops up on the screen as costume director, and I was like, okay.
Yeah. I'm blank. Now I'm blank. I was like, I had a question now.
Any other questions?
How's everyone?
How's everybody
else?
doing?
Everyone else that was in the chat, like, can
I was
someone
gonna say,
like?
would you ever want to would you ever want to do the costumes for a movie?
Yes. I'm actually very interested in film in general, actually. I do want to maybe experiment in that in the future. I always just am like, okay, when I'm older, I'll do it. So
Yeah.
that's something that I feel that way about because I'm such an avid movie watcher.
And do you ever get sick of sewing?
No. No, I don't know. I'm Virgo, and I'm very, very into the tedious,
Yeah.
long-ended work. I love the tediousness of sewing sometimes, like to a weird level.
When people place an order, do you have a time frame for when they're supposed to get their piece?
Yeah, it depends. If it's like an accessory item, like 2 or 3 weeks, and then if it's just like a piece, probably like 4 to 6, and then sometimes like if it's like a really intense piece, like more than 6 weeks. So it just depends.
Yeah, and they know when they buy your piece that it takes you time to get, which is nice because it kind of like frees you from like, you know, the stress of like having to produce something for a certain day.
Yeah.
A little bit, right?
Yeah.
And so you work 7 days a week?
Yes, I do. That's because I've been working at
The center, yeah.
I work at a COVID testing center, like on Friday through Monday, and then the other 3 days I'm just trying to like
do your own work.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of been a great way to cope with everything. It's like I constantly don't have any free time. Highly recommend it. And actually time has been flying because of that as well.
And then usually would you be just making your clothes or doing other things like part-time work?
Yeah, no, I was working as an after-school teacher before this. Yeah, it was kind of fun because I was teaching like robotics. So, yeah. But it was like robotics like to an elementary school level. So very, very basic. I know nothing about robotics.
What kind of robot? Like what?
Like we just like learn about like motors, like batteries.
That's cool.
It was very fun. Yeah, working with kids is something that I've always been into. Yeah, well.
All right.
Yeah, it's been great talking about everything. It's kind of like been a nice release from working so much and just sort of keeping to my thoughts to myself. So it didn't feel like release.
Yeah. And I feel like I learned so much. Like you pulled up all these things and it was really great.
You want me to I can send a list of like the artists that have like inspired me and also like designers that I think are also great to watch out for, just because I can't, whenever anyone asks me something besides movies, like my mind goes like blank. So I do have a lot of inspo that I want to share. Just I need to like look at my notes.
Yeah, send it over. I'll when I put up the video, I'll put all the links in too, so everyone can see.
And if you have like a good link to a text that you think is really important, send that over as well, and we'll make
Absolutely. Yeah. And also on my website, in like the journal section, I have some writings on some things that I touched on here.
Cool.
Yeah. All right.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you
you so
everyone.
much.
Much.
Thank you.
Martina.
Take care.
Bye.
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 Bye, y'all.